Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Bodan Saroid. This is the first video that I'm uploading on the topic of music analysis. The whole goal of this channel is to provide students with new tools for their compositions. And this channel will be focusing mostly on romantic, classical, common practice composition, although we'll also cover some more modern writing. In this case, Beethoven is a master class of composition. And this first sonata, which was dedicated to his teacher Haydn, represents a very large amount of techniques that we can learn and apply in our pieces. So without further ado, we'll start by talking a little bit about what's a sonata and what's the different techniques that you would usually find in a general sonata, and then specifically we'll focus on this first movement, trying to understand how it was written and what are the different techniques that Beethoven used while composing it. So, what's a first movement sonata? Well, the first movement of a sonata usually consists of three sections, which are called exposition. The whole role of the exposition is to present the different materials that will be developed in the sonata. So it's like a presentation, an exposition of them. After that, usually we find a double repeat bar like this one. And after it, the next section that starts after the repeat bar is called development. So the difference between exposition and development is self-explanatory. The development is developing or building upon previous materials, whereas the exposition, in essence, should be presenting the materials for the first time. So once that happens, we're usually facing a recapitulation. And in this case, the recapitulation begins here. So what's the role of a recapitulation? The recapitulation has as its goal to restate and present again the main themes that were developed in the development and were presented for the first time in the exposition. So just so we hear at the beginning, the exposition sounds like this. Right? The development is that same theme, but now it's in a major key. And in the recapitulation, Beethoven is presenting us again with the same main theme. Right. So that's like a very broad overview of what a sonata is. And of course, on a second level of analysis, we'll find that each of these three sections has different parts. So I'll use this white empty space in the square so we can write a little chart. We have the exposition. We have the development, which is this middle part, and the recapitulation. In some cases, after that, usually we can find a little coda, or in some scores, a larger coda, which is basically the end of the movement. It's a little addition that composers add at the end, so the movement can end. Now, what is inside each of these parts? In the exposition, generally we'll encounter two thematic groups. The first thematic group will be A, theme A. Usually it's one, but you can, in certain cases, encounter more than one. Then we'll have a transitional section, which is usually called transition or bridge. There are different ways you can label it. And then we'll find a second thematic group of a contrasting key. And in this case, well, we're finding at least three different themes: B1, B2, B3, and usually a closing idea or a codetta, right? A closing theme. So what's the main feature of this? Well, the main feature is that we're starting in one key, which is the main key. In this case, it's F minor. And And the transition we're modulating. So we're finding instability, we're moving away from that main key and we arrive at a contrasting key, right? Or in this case, the relative key. So we're moving from F minor to A flat major. Now, how do I know that that's the case? Well, because if we look at the beginning, well, it starts clearly with the F minor arpeggio, right? And if we look at the end, which is what happens right before the double bar, we can find an A flat major chord. So that's pointing to the new key that we arrived to. And now both of these keys share the same key signature, it's 4 flats, but we're moving from one minor key to its major relative key. So that's the whole story of what happens in the exposition. Now, developments usually are much freer in form, so we do not encounter such a strict form or structure as it happens here in the beginning. So this is very common, and it can go from relative keys to dominant keys to different keys. The main point is that we go to a contrasting key from one place to another. It's like a little journey that we're traveling and move away from home. Whereas in the development, mostly the composers just play around with the different themes. That's what we usually encounter. So we'll have different sections that play with the main themes. And we'll usually have a build-up or a climax. And that climax is, well, the point of maximum tension, maximum intensity in the piece. In many cases, it's also connected with what we call a standing on the dominant. So when we're standing on the dominant, we're just repeating the dominant of the key. Where in F minor, the dominant is C. And we have like that's the restated, and then it resolves back to the tonic. So that's basically what happens in this sonata. We have a lot of C's just right before the recapitulation hits in. Now, how does the recapitulation look like? Well, it has a theme A, same main theme. It has a transition, and it has the same thematic group with B1, B2, B3, and the closing idea. But the main difference is that all of these are now not in different keys, but they are staying all in the same key. So we do not modulate. We're staying all in the same color, in the same F minor main key. And that kind of makes this section, the transition, to lose part of its meaning, because the meaning of the transition initially was to modulate, to take us from one place to another. Now, when we are staying in the same key, there isn't much of a point in the transition. So it basically becomes a little development of the different ideas. And in some cases, like in Mozart's C minor sonata, he actually introduces a new theme there to provide a little bit of variety. And after that, well, the coda, as its name says, it's just the ending. And it usually provides a conclusive cadence to end the movement. And that's like a big, broad overview of what a sonata is, right? So in some cases, the repeat bars, and this is important, will be placed here. So we'll have a repeat bar right there. Exposition. Not all sonatas have repeat bars. And the repetition starts there. So we'll hear the exposition 2 times. And in other cases, well, the coda, like in Mozart's C minor sonata, which we'll look at in another video, the coda is excluded from the repetition. That's not the case in Beethoven. Beethoven actually repeats the coda in this first sonata. So we have actually 3 sections played twice. We have development, recapitulation, and coda played 2 times in a row. And that's something that a lot of performers sometimes miss, and they just skip the repeats and just play the music once. I believe that if the repetition bars were written for some reason, probably we should kind of remain loyal to what's the original intention of the composer and perform them as written. So, well, that's the overview. Now let's try to find these sections in here. So it's clear where the main theme begins. Main theme. And is the beginning. And we have the first punctuation mark here, which is this rest. So let's listen to this bit. Right, and that's the first pause that we're getting there. Now, after that, we have something that resembles the main theme, but it's now in the left hand. Right? So in theory, you could think, well, that's maybe the continuation of the theme. But the problem with that statement is that it's already in a different key, and as we can remember, the whole point of the transition is to modulate. So this beginning in a different key probably points to the fact that we're modulating and we're going to a different place. Now, how do we know if that's the transition or not? Well, the proper thing to do is to go to the recapitulation. So we're scrolling down, and we'll play now the recapitulation. As we can see, the theme sounds pretty much the same, but now what happens after the silence is different. It's now starting on C, whereas at the beginning it was starting on G. So that's clearly telling us that we are now not in the main theme, we're in the transition. And after that, well, the second thing we should find is where does the second theme begin? So we'll keep playing. It clearly tells us that something is different here, and if we look closer at it, we're already here in a different key. We're in the new key, which is A flat major. Now, thematically, probably A flat major and this being as B1 doesn't seem to be much of a theme. It's just a set of arpeggios going downwards. But we should remember that basically the entire theme itself, the opening theme, wasn't either a very big melodic line. It was just an arpeggio. It wasn't a melody as such that was built around some motifs that were not basic structures. Like in this case, it's just straightforward arpeggios. So it makes sense to also assume that B1 would be based on arpeggio. Now, this texture ends here, and after that we can see a new texture emerge here. So we could label that as B2. And here we have a further third texture, which could be B3. Now, some of you might actually think that maybe this division between B1 and B2 could be omitted, and we could think of all of this as being one large B1 theme. In that case, well, I don't have any arguments against that. I think it could also make perfect sense, and we can connect them, because in a way, this theme as such doesn't seem to really have much of a closing, and if we're thinking of it maybe like a thematic idea and a closing idea, it would make much more sense to think of these as such. So in this case, that would be B2, and then we would have the B3 being here. Now with that, B3, which is the last theme, is at the same time the one that acts as this little codetta. It's a closing idea. If we were to divide this theme B1 into two themes, if we were to split it into B1 and B2, then probably the codetta wouldn't be there. So yeah, I leave that up to you. I'll be happy to just examine all of this as one single theme. Now, what should we look in here? Well, let's just play a little bit how these themes sound. So the first theme is this. Right, you see it's very connected, very smooth, and then we have this. And finally, B3. Well, at a closer examination, I would actually even feel more tempted to go in this discussion with a smaller division. So we'll label this as B2, although in the broader implications, well, we could actually connect B1 and B2, because if we look closer at B2 and B3, they're also very connected and they're building upon the same material. So that's basically how the second half of the exposition sounds. Now, let's have a closer look on how Beethoven composed the main theme. Apparently, it just looks very straightforward. We only have three materials, so we'll be highlighting these with different colors. Let's use green for the first material, is this arpeggio. Now, arpeggios were really common at Beethoven's time, and Mozart's C minor sonata starts with an arpeggio. It actually has the same formula in this same rhythm. Bum, 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 bum. So there is a big relationship with that. Also, Mozart's 40th Symphony, the last movement, has this type of arpeggio. Right, so it does it in G minor. Pa, 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 pa. Right, we have that G minor. Now, in this case, that arpeggio is being presented firstly here, then it's further developed here. It's presented in a contracted manner, like that, and it's also presented in the transition. So we have different instances of that same material. The next material that we can look at, it's the right hand continuation, which is something compound. We have a descending scale, and we also have this double neighbor tone. So in reality, well, that accounts for most of the remaining parts that we have. That has an added C, which is a little bit like from this green pickup, right? And this is a scale, similar material, and now we have an inversion. Originally it was, and now it's, right? So in a way, Beethoven is basically creating the entire melody out of two single ideas. Let's listen to it and carefully pay attention to how these unfold. Right, we had there two, now green, yellow, green and yellow together. This is green arpeggio, scale yellow, inversion, and down to the leading tone in this case. So I have missed actually adding these green leaps. They're closer to an arpeggio than a scale. Now, what's in the left hand? In the left hand, we can actually give another color. Let's put pink. We can find a rhythmic motive that Beethoven used a lot in his music. This is the Fate motive. Right, we are seeing it there. So it's a contraposition of these two ideas that creates this beautiful dialogue. And basically the entire left hand is based on that idea. And what's remarkable probably is the use of Beethoven's silences. So he starts with this long rest in the left hand, which makes the melody stay by itself. And then the melody in the left hand, the motive with the block chords begins, and the right hand starts to have the rest. So there is this very basic principle of counterpoint or dialogue between two different materials. In this case, something that's more melodic, it's the form of an arpeggio against a block chord in the left hand. And all of that with these beautiful rests, which we can, well, spot all across the score. So what we are seeing at the same time is this little contraction of the materials, because the first statement, which is presented here, introduces us with the theme, and after that we have a much shorter or smaller form of it. So we're first presented with what looks like a 2 bars and a half, and after that is just 2 bars. We don't have the pickup. After it, Beethoven does smaller units of single measures, and if we look further, we're seeing halves with that rest chord, rest chord, rest chord, and eventually Beethoven arrives to a single beat. So this is a clear example of a motivic fragmentation, where we're starting with a longer structure, in this case of 3 motives, and we begin to compress, 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 and ultimately we arrive to silence. That's exactly what happens here. So let's try to play it again while listening to that contraction. Again. Now we speed up. Shorter. Shorter. And eventually silence. So it's a speeding up process. It's a speeding up process that leads us to this unique silence. At the same time, this speeding up process is happening, Beethoven is tracing a very subtle but clear melodic line which guides both the bass and the melody. And that's happening here. So we can see this F, which is the beginning note, which is restated there again, and now that F is moving upwards like a scale, right? So that takes us through a journey. It's a little journey. Well, the first F is irrelevant in it because the main one that we'll focus is on that one, and it's a journey that goes from the tonic to the dominant, right? Now, you might be wondering if that journey was a coincidence. It's most likely not, because usually Beethoven would think of both its melodic line and bass line. And a lot of the times this is what distinguishes composers that are just starting out and they're just thinking about beautiful melodies, but they forget a lot of the times about the bass. So I always encourage students to think of a coherent bass line. In this case, is this ascending beautiful line. We can see how it's moving up, up, and up. Now, that exact same motion is replicated by the melody. So we can see it right there. It starts with the F moves to the G goes to an A flat, and the A flat keeps going to the B flat and the C. So in a way, Beethoven is doing a canon. We have an F, G, A flat, B, C, and it's the same in the left hand. And there is a moment where both coincide. And once Beethoven actually does this ascending scale, in a single bar, he just retracts back to the tonic. So that's what we're seeing. In that's basically, well, also the point of maximum tension. It's the first climactic point. It's this little climax where we're seeing a fortissimo within a piano, which is kind of remarkable. And after that, this descent and dissolution into the main chord. Now, at this point, we haven't actually made any comments about the harmony, and the harmony isn't that interesting here. It's just a difference. It's just a simple contrast between tonic and dominant. So we're starting with the tonic, then Beethoven does dominant. Well, he does it actually here on the downbeat. It's a dominant 7th chord and first inversion. Then we're seeing again the tonic, another dominant chord. Well, this what has the tonic in that. Well, the root of the chord is that little grace note, so dominant 7th, and second inversion this time, then tonic, and here a dominant. Now, you might be wondering, why are we seeing these inversions? Well, they're basically pointing to the melodic line. So we have that melodic line in the bass. The only chord that's not tonic and dominant is this single chord, and it's a very beautiful one. It's a half diminished chord, so we can highlight it here, half diminished in first inversion. It's the 2nd degree. Right, we see a lot of half diminished chords in modern music. Let's just, well, have Wagner with Tristan und Isolde. That's a half diminished chord. Or Debussy. We're having the half diminished now. Right, so that's a half diminished. And here it's happening in a much more classical way. Right, and it resolves there. Technically speaking, we could say that this is actually the 1st degree again, because it's this F by itself, or a suspension of a 4th that goes to the 3rd. Like that. So that's pretty much how Beethoven wrote his first theme. He thought about these 3 ideas, and from that point onwards, he looked on different ways that he could develop it and arrived at this beautiful statement of 8 measures. Now let's look at the transition. In the transition, Beethoven is supposed to develop the materials, and there is no better way to develop them than just by picking one single idea. And in this case, Beethoven just focuses on the ending. We know that that ending was this little double neighbor tone, and it was also a scale. So Beethoven basically first plays around with a double neighbor tone. He has a repeated note, by the way. So initially it was just this. But now we have. That's all restating the same motive. And now we have a scale, which is here, right? A descending scale, very beautifully presented 3 times, and it's basically answered with the left hand in contrary motion. That's left hand, right hand, and both together. That's leading us to that place. Now, the entire passage previously also was built on a beautiful scale. You can see it there. C, B flat, B flat, A. So in a way, the entire transition is based on the yellow motive and just starts with the little green one at the beginning. The block chords that we were seeing here, in a way, now are expanded. So we can see a little bit of a trace back of that pink color there. Now, let's analyze this harmonically first, because it's going to be a much more sophisticated harmony. If in the first case, well, we're just playing with 2 main chords, tonic and dominant, in the transition, Beethoven really tries to make something more complex. So he starts with this C minor. Firstly, C minor is not a common chord in F minor. In the key of F minor, the normal thing is to find C major, which is the dominant that goes to the tonic. But Beethoven specifically picks C minor, which provides us with a different feel. It's also harmonized with the B natural, so it sounds literally like we've modulated to the key of C minor and we're in the tonic. Whereas in reality, we didn't really go for too much further away. Now, after that, we encountered this F minor chord. So in the key of C minor, we can think of it as a fourth, right? Like that type of modulation. And it's in a way what's happening, but if we look closer, we'll find that there is a D flat. And it's not a single D flat, it's restated 3 times. That changes completely the meaning of the F minor chord. So initially F minor was this, and now it becomes this. That's a very dissonant chord. And we'll actually give it a blue color because it will reappear in more places, and Beethoven is specifically using it here. Now, how to interpret this chord? Well, I like to think of it as a D flat major, 7th chord, with a root C. Now, that chord can mean multiple things depending on how you are looking at it. So if we're looking at it from the key of C minor, it's the Neapolitan. And you might be wondering, what is the Neapolitan? Well, the Neapolitan is the flat 2. So in C minor, this is Neapolitan. Beethoven uses a lot Neapolitans in his more modern pieces. Just his other F minor sonata, the Appassionata, starts with that usage of the Neapolitan, or the Moonlight Sonata. We start in C sharp minor, and now we have the Neapolitan. So what is the Neapolitan? It's basically the 2nd degree of the scale, and C minor is the D. And we're lowering it by a half step. So we're having D flat. Now, in the key of F minor, which is the original key at which we are in, this chord exists, and is the 6th degree. It's D flat. Right. And in the key of that we're going to, it's A flat major. And F flat major, this is the 4th degree, right? So it's a 4, a subdominant, right? And all of that is happening there, and it will be the chord that will enable the modulation to happen. Because what happens afterwards is A flat major. So in a way, Beethoven is going through the 6th degree of the main key, or through the Neapolitan of the dominant, to A flat major, which is the new key. And what happens after that is just a straightforward 2, 5, 1. At that point, 2, 5, 1. At that point, we already are in the new place. So how do we label this chord? Well, that would be a 7 to minor 7. This would be also a 7th chord, but in the 2nd inversion. And we arrive there to the tonic. So once this is accomplished, Beethoven already can start B1. But he wants to do what's usually taught in composition class. It's a standing on the dominant. So we're trying to find a way to extend the tension, the feeling of the dominant, before we arrive to the main key. And in this case, this is achieved through a repetition of a chord sequence that basically does a 4, or does a 2nd degree, 2nd degree, B flat minor. It does then the dominant of the dominant, which is the major, and it goes to 5. And that's basically repeated there with different variations in the right hand. But mostly the harmony is the same. We have this. Right, it's clearly opening up and creating a suspense. You cannot end the piece in that chord progression. Now, This standing on the dominant is very significant because it creates again a little climax, a little climactic point. So Beethoven is clearly building tension in each repetition. The first repetition is just this. Well, the first statement. Now the first repetition of that statement has this commentary. And it's also syncopated. We have the syncopation motive. So that will be also used a lot. Syncopation. And the last one is with octaves. So really octaves becomes a new kind of motive, and I would dare to give it actually this orange color, because those octaves now will be really present in the left hand. So in a way, Beethoven is connecting and presenting a material at the end of the transition that will become the main material afterwards. We have these octaves, and now they're just broken octaves like that. Right, so what's happening here? How does this work and make so much sense? Well, it basically does so because if we look close enough, we can clearly spot a circle of fifths, right? Where is that? Well, it's this F, B, E flat, A flat. And that's exactly how you go from F to A flat. And that's basically the whole goal of the modulation, that we're taking from one place to another. So we're going from F minor to F flat major. Well, that's basically it. So the transition has, so to speak, two main parts. We have this little introduction, which kind of resembles the opening green motive, and then an entire section based on the double neighbor tone, 5 bars, and another standing on the dominant. The 5 bars are basically a circle of fifths that takes us from the C to A flat. Actually, C would be the first note of the circle, so we can start with C and trace it back to that F. Right? And the second half is basically a standing on the dominant, where it's repeating 3 times the half cadence on the dominant key. The second theme is a very peculiar one because it's a perfect counterexample of what the main theme is. So let's just try to make sense of that. As we can see, the main key here, and I'd like for that probably to write it above. So we'll be having here theme A, and here we'll be writing theme B, and we'll put all of the characteristics. So theme A, it's in a minor key, and it starts with staccato. Theme B, it's in a major key, and it starts with legato. Right, so it's clear from the beginning. We have the staccato, then legato, whereas here we have first staccato, legato, and then staccato. Now, the direction of this is ascending and then descending, right? Whereas in this case, the direction is first descending and then ascending. So what I mean is, first it goes up, and then it goes down. Whereas in the second theme, we first go down, and then we go up. Now, harmonically, the first theme consists of a tonic that goes to the dominant. So we're moving from tonic to the dominant. Now, in the second theme, Beethoven moves from the dominant to the tonic. First, we have dominant, and then we go to the tonic. More things that are built here. Well, this is based on block chords, and we have silences in the left hand. And the second theme, B, actually it's just the opposite. We have a continuous flow of octaves, not even chords, but octaves. And we have no silences. It's a continuous flow. So these are perfect opposites, right? And at the same time here we have a a harmonic change that basically is characterizing each repetition of the motive. So the harmonic rhythm is speeding up, and it's also tied to motives, whereas in this case, in the second theme, the harmonic rhythm stays and it's connected to each presentation. So here we have just the tonic and all of the motives were presented there, whereas in this case we had both harmonic changes, dominant and tonic, within one motive, and it's the thing that repeats all the time. Now this has a very clear direction. The music has a directionality, and we're analyzing that direction with all of these different blue lines, whereas I think that there couldn't be anything less directional than the B1 theme. It's static. You can see how it does 3 times exactly the same statement. Right? It's 3 times the same one. So basically it's just the opposite of that. The further we look, the more differences we'll encounter. So I invite you to leave in the comments any other differences that you might be seeing that make B1 and A1 a perfect contraposition of themes, because they are indeed just the opposite in its best form. So that basically made Beethoven come up with this melody, not something particularly exciting at first, but the closer we examine it, the more sense it makes as a beautiful contraposition to the main theme. Now harmonically, it's just a dominant 9th chord, actually a dominant flat 9 chord, because we're seeing that F flat. And another beautiful relationship is that this E natural that you were seeing here, the E natural, the beginning, is the same as the F flat. So in a way, that note is still part of F minor, and it's part of A flat major. It's connecting both places. So harmonically we have this dominant and tonic, and all of that on top of a pedal point. Now this pedal point, really what it does is it's a continuation of the standing on the dominant. So the standing on the dominant in a way here blurs the boundary between where the B1 theme begins and where the transition ends. And that's a very sophisticated technique that points to a very high conscientiousness of how to arrange themes in a more sophisticated manner, not just a straightforward presentation of one idea and another one. So it's a very beautifully connected element. Now, if we were to give this colors, obviously it's an arpeggio, it's inverted. What is this arpeggio? So we're giving it the green color. Now, the yellow motive partially could be spotted, so I won't deny that it doesn't exist. It does. It can be partially spotted in these 3 notes that move downwards. Now, the climax as such, remember that here there was one main climactic point, that's fortissimo. Now we have multiple climaxes, so that could be actually another point that I've missed. Multiple climaxes each time on these different points. So basically that's what B1 has to offer us. It's not a very sophisticated idea. Now let's jump into B2. So B2 is mostly based on the concept of the neighbor tone. We have this neighbor tone here, and now if we skip the middle note, that's what we get, and that's what Beethoven works here, right? And it's this motive that is taking us across all of this space. And the other part is probably more closely related to broken chords. So we can clearly connect this to the pink chords. First they were presented like this, and now we have a more Alberti based. So if Beethoven were to do this as the original theme, it would sound like this. which makes sense, but it's not what we're seeing. This has much more energy. Now, it's interesting because B1 starts with this flow of eighth notes, which we didn't see. And that's another point to add here. So here we have rhythm in quarter notes, and there they were having a rhythm in eighth notes. So I won't be adding more of these because I want you to think of some in the comments. But here we have the rhythm in eighth notes, which is way faster, right? And that rhythm in eighth notes is continuous. So we see it in B1, B2, B3 up to the codetta. And it's a very beautiful way of tying up themes together. So after that, well, we see that here there is a little bit of more of an arpeggio form, right? Needless to say that that's just an inverted contrary motion. So D, right? It's done there again. It takes us to a quite interesting form because it's like an A, B, A inside of a theme. Now, what is Beethoven doing here harmonically? Well, he takes us from the tonic, which is here inverted, to the dominant. So far, very conventional. Again, first inversion. Back to the tonic, right? This moved, so I'll put it back to the dominant. And now we're seeing again the tonic. After that has been done, Beethoven is going to the dominant of the dominant and doing the dominant afterwards. So it's a very very moving forward harmony because it creates additional tension. Here we're just stating the tonic, but now we're moving forward, right? And if it wasn't for this return to the tonic afterwards, Beethoven could easily have modulated to E flat major, which would be the dominant of the relative, and establish a new key there. So basically Beethoven is doing again a dominant tonic. Well, it's not a straightforward dominant, it's a diminished chord, but it has the same function as a dominant, tonic to tonic. And after that, this is again a raising scale. We're seeing it from the dominant to the tonic, and again dominant with second inversion, right? And that raising scale is something that is not new. We saw it basically in the yellow motive, right, with the scales. So it's beautifully outlined there, right? And that raising scale is just the opposite of what we're seeing in the right hand, which is a descending scale, which again points to a very beautiful and clearly written counterpoint, right? Which is these lines that kind of move across and create this type of interlock, right? It's interesting because that's actually the point of maximum tension. It's this point of just a second, and if we look at the range that we have between these two notes, it's 1 octave, 2, 3, 4 octaves in a fourth. So it's quadruple octave plus fourth. It's a very big distance, a perfect fourth. So we're moving from here, literally, to here. And that scale leads us to that point. So, well, that's B3, but we haven't made the complete sense of B2. So something more to comment about B2 is, again, the use of silence or rests. If you look at it, the first time Beethoven presents them, it's these short pauses that create this type of sighing effect. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. But then, their cadence, their statement. And then we return with a sighing. So far we saw very different usage of silence. We saw an absolute pause here. We saw silences for creating this dialogue. We saw pauses to short up and shrink the motive. We saw silences with this motivic function, like sighing and then silences and rests, to create this punctuation and enlargement of the melodic structure. So once we arrive at B3, B3 is very unique because it presents basically the arpeggio, which is again the green motive, but now it's not like in the original. It sounds similar, but it has the syncopation, right? The syncopation that we were seeing there, that beautiful syncopation that in the transition was applied to the scale. Now in B3 it's applied to the arpeggio, and well, basically the entire left hand is an arpeggio, so there isn't much more to comment there. Whereas the right hand is a beautiful scale. Now this is for the first time a theme that actually has a very logical structure that sounds like a period, right? So just to contrast these two, period is the opposite of what a sentence is, right? So what is a sentence? In a sentence we have an opening idea that's repeated 2 times, followed by a closing idea that's repeated 2 times, right? If you're wondering what that is, well, I'll give you an example of a very typical sentence, Mozart's alla turca. We have a opening idea that was repeating it several times, and then we have a closing idea. That's a different theme, so it's like one theme and another, they're contrasting. Now, in this case, the sentence is that's 2 times, and now we have a closing idea that's basically a shrinking. So in a way we have that sentence structure. Now, a period is different. In a period we have an opening idea followed by a closing idea, and that is repeated 2 times. So we would have opening, closing, and then again the same opening and closing. Now Beethoven here clearly tells us where the opening and the closing starts, because he has opening in forte, closing in piano, opening again in forte with the same music, and closing again in piano with slightly different music. So basically this is a symmetrical period that's structured in 4 bars with an added measure. That's the resolution of that dominant that goes to the tonic. Harmonically, there isn't much to say about it. It's just an alternation between perfect cadence chords. So you have 1, 2, you can have 1, and then the dominant, and that's exactly what Beethoven does the second time again. So it's 2 times this progression of. We can hear it here. So after that's presented, so far, let's just analyze how melodic are these themes. Well, none of them so far were melodies as such, but there were development of motives. If we just compare this maybe with Mozart, of course, he also develops motives, but it's a clear melody that you can recall, and it has its own melodic line. Whereas in this case, it's this set of 3 motives that eventually basically invades the entire page, and it becomes a structure that builds the entire thing. And this is really what Beethoven became very known for, and this is the technique of motivic development that's very commonly seen in the music of Haydn. So in this case, the music is really a masterpiece of compositional techniques, because Beethoven is teaching us how you can just from 3 single ideas from those 3 ideas create the entire first movement. And this is what we're seeing. So the codetta is no exception. Where is the left hand taken from? It's taken from the end of the first theme. Remember those silences and chords? That's exactly what we're seeing again here. So those chords are very similar to this. That structure, now it's here. Right? And what is the right hand? Well, the right hand is the yellow motive of the scale. We're seeing a little scale. Right? So it's just this descending scale moving down. And you might be wondering, but well, that's not everything. There are more things to it. Well, there are some, but not many, because the rest of it is just this perfect cadence of 5-1, which is a hint to the circle of fifths, and that is part of the green arpeggio motive. So, well, basically we could clearly highlight these as part of the green arpeggio motives, which basically create this texture. And the pink would be assigned to these chords too. Now, what is harmonically happening here? Well, harmonically, Beethoven is doing one of the most bizarre chords that you could have at the time. It's a diminished seventh chord. A diminished seventh chord is a very particular chord because it's filled with tension and ambiguity. And that diminished chord is not resolving to the dominant straightforward. It's going to the cadential 4/6, then dominant seventh and tonic. And that's repeated several times. Right, so that's the underlying texture. This diminished seventh acts as a dominant of the dominant. Then we have the tonic in second inversion, dominant seventh, and back to tonic. Right, so it's moving here. And this is again 3 times. So we have 2 repetitions of that harmonic progression. The most beautiful chord probably here is this one, which is a dominant over tonic. So when we're thinking of a dominant, we're usually thinking of 5 dominant sevenths going to 1. But in this case, Beethoven blends the dominant sevenths on top of the tonic. Right? Beethoven didn't invent this sound. Actually, it's as far we can trace it back to Bach. Right? In Bach's most famous Toccata and Fugue, we can find this tonic with the diminished seventh chord resolved there, which is similar to that same dissonance that you see there. So this last theme is very clearly pointing with almost a crescendo gesture by increasing the range and moving upwards to this fortissimo. And Beethoven marks it with con expressione. That's the first time we find this. It sounds like agitated, it sounds anxious, it's moving forward, it's creating a lot of melodic movement and also a discourse that's all over the place. It's moving up, down. It's very angular. And after that moment, Beethoven closes the exposition. So, how do we make sense of the fact that here we end in A flat major and now we start in C minor? Well, all of that happens because of the note Beethoven starts with. It's C. C is a common tone to F minor and to A flat major. And the second reason is that A flat major here is presented as a chord, but here the F minor is not straightforwardly presented as a chord, but we have a progressive unfolding of it, and really we do not start to feel that we're in F minor up to the point where we hear the dominant, or at least the leading tone there. So in A flat major, we also could feel the chord of F minor as this 6th degree relative. So the development begins with this beautiful statement. And clearly this is not an original material, but it was presented in the theme A1 or theme A. Theme A sounded like this. Now, what's remarkable is how malleable this theme is, because the first time that it's presented, it's in F minor, it's straightforward. And not all themes actually have this flexibility. Just to prove you with an example, we can think of Mozart's Turkish March. That's in A minor. If I turn it into A major, it doesn't seem to make much sense. Well, it sounds like music, but it loses a lot of its essence and character. However, in Beethoven's case, since the themes are so generic, they're based on these very abstract materials. Just to give you an example, the most abstract material is Beethoven's, right, that Fate motive, just three notes that resolve into a lower third. In this case, it's an arpeggio. So these motives are very generic and they allow us to, well, do many things with them. And this still remains and retains with the same character. Now, what is the interesting difference? Well, if we look close enough, originally Beethoven had the tonic and the dominant, but it wasn't like this. We would have 2 times the green motive, right, which is happening there, and we would have another green motive there, which is missing, right, probably just that D, and then we would have the yellow motive in the right hand answered by the pink. So basically Beethoven contracts and does a contraction. This is a little bit of a technical term. We're just contracting the theme. So it was supposed to be like something like that. But that's missing. So all we have is, right, which is basically the point at which the theme was left here. So we could technically say that Beethoven basically removes all of these 3 measures and moves directly from right, and that would make sense in the exposition, but clearly that would make us lose all of the technical beauty that was presented at the beginning. So once this is happening, then the development, Beethoven teaches us yet another way of developing the theme, which is by transforming subtly certain notes and making them modulate. And basically this, which was straightforward harmony, like first year composition students would do that, it then becomes diminished. And that's very advanced. I mean, we're seeing a diminished chord, diminished sevenths. And you might be wondering, what is the diminished sevenths dominant of? Well, it's the 7th degree of the 6th of the relative, right, of the F minor. And how do we make sense of it? Well, basically Beethoven just moves chromatically. He takes this dominant 7th chord that we have here originally and just decides to move a half step up and then a half step down. And thus we're moving from place. It's a very beautiful way of modulating, and we can learn and apply that to another key. Let's think we're in C major. We go to G dominant 7th. and then we end it in the dominant of D. So if we're in E major, dominant 7th, and there we go. So that's exactly what Beethoven does here with an augmented 6th chord. This is a German augmented 6th, right? Let's quickly remember how augmented 6th chords are built. So you have the augmented 6th interval that resolves to the dominant, right? So that's basically the outer and the bottom line. The outer lines, the higher and the lower one, go to the dominant. And in the middle, we can fill just the third. We fill it in with a third. It's an Italian augmented 6th. If you put the third and the fourth, it's French German 6th, French augmented 6th, sorry. And if you put the third and the fifth, it's a German one. And that's the one that Beethoven uses here. So we have right. And basically that is structurally, motivically, it's the same. Right, so we have the same motives that we had before. We had that green motive and then the two statements of the yellow one. This way we arrive to something that clearly sounds like theme B1. So basically Beethoven went from A to B without a transition, and it's telling us that the transition here wasn't really a need. Beethoven had tools, more than enough tools, to just modulate from one place to another. Something that many times, and when the original sonata form was invented, wasn't the case. So composers would have one beautiful theme, and they would have the second theme in a different key, and they needed a transition to connect these two themes. In this case, Beethoven is clearly capable of just taking one theme, change it, and have the second theme. Right? And that second B1 theme, it's directly tied with that. Furthermore, this theme was originally in minor, and now it becomes major. Whereas this theme was originally in major, it now becomes minor. So it's kind of the inversion of the roles that you would have in terms of keys. That becomes major, and the major one becomes minor. Right. And what key are we in? We're in B flat minor. So let's write this out. We have B flat minor, and here we had A flat major. So Beethoven is taking us from the relative key, A flat, third degree, to the fourth degree, which is the subdominant, B flat minor. That is a very interesting journey, because after it, the logical step would be to go to C, and that's probably what we'll find right here, because this is theme B1 again in C minor. I'll play them first here in B flat. Now C minor. Right, so Beethoven took us from one place to another, and he did literally what looks like a sequence, right? So this music, all of this music that's presented here, Beethoven just copied and pasted there and pasted it a step higher, right? If you look closer, probably you'll see that B1 is there, but also it's B2, and B2 is really used to modulate. B2 allows us to go from B flat minor to C minor. So let's look closer at how this is unfolding. Harmonically, we have the same thing. It's 5-1, so there isn't anything special. But in the modulation, we're seeing a very beautiful contrary motion line, right? That's moving upwards. and it's kind of expanding, right? And all we see is, again, a 1-5-1, so nothing very remarkable about that harmony. But then we're seeing all of a sudden an Italian augmented 6 of the new key, and that's kind of really unexpected. So we'd have the tonic, dominant, back to tonic, and now that becomes augmented 6. So what it's teaching us really is that you can go from one key to the one that's a step higher. Let's say we're in D minor, so we're to replicate this, and now we can go to E minor by doing the augmented 6. So we're doing D minor, tonic, dominant, tonic, augmented 6 of B minor, and I'm now in E minor. I'm a step higher. So this is already the Italian augmented 6 of the new key, C minor. And it makes sense as a modulation due to the common tone movement that you have. You have this, right? It's a very similar technique to what we had there, right? So we're moving in this case from a dominant to an augmented 6. And in this case, we're moving from a tonic to an augmented 6. So basically, Beethoven is using the two ways that he knew at the time of, probably he knew more, but two ways very clearly distinct between a dominant and a tonic as a modulation to a step higher through an augmented 6. And it's very effective. It works very beautifully. Very smoothly. Right, well, if that's with the D flat, I'm not sure if, well, that makes more sense with the D natural. Now, after that, we are encountering the exact same material, so there isn't much to talk about. The harmony of this is just 5-1. Right, it's 2 times. So all in all, Beethoven just did a statement in the tonic. Right, he decided that it would be good to go to the dominant, and we went from F minor to the relative major, flat major, and up to the dominant. Now, this path, which seems very clean and direct, it's exactly what Beethoven reverts in the next part. So if we look at the arpeggio motive, which is this B2 motive, where we're seeing it all across this section, now it's presented in the left hand. And it's presented with 3 statements, each of which moves down until we arrive there. So what is really happening here? Well, in reality, we're seeing the same process, C minor, B flat minor, and F flat major going downwards. With the harmony that you would expect. It's a 5-1, 5-1, and here we just stay on the 5. That journey, really what it does, it kind of proves that Beethoven didn't really have the need to go, I mean, he could have ended here in C minor, and from that C minor have the standing on the dominant, which is in C, and then go to the recapitulation. But really what Beethoven proves is that that was too easy for him, and he really wanted more development, and he shows us more techniques. One of them is this reverse back to the original A flat major. And well, for me, I would argue that that's basically the beginning of the second part of the development. So I would label this as D2. I would have this as D1, which has a clear, coherent logic. It's moving upwards through the main theme A and the 2 subordinate themes, B1 and B2. And then D2, the second section of the development, D2, development 2, is reversing back the process. And it does so by introducing 3-part writing, which is kind of quite remarkable. A lot of the writing in Beethoven, by the way, is not so pianistic as really based on string quartet writing. If you look at a lot of this is 3 parts. That's 4-part writing. So you could easily imagine this music being written for a string quartet, and probably in some drafts it might have been done so, because the voices are very clearly distributed and they are basically within the range of these instruments. Right, that could be the cello, then you could have this dialogue between the 2 first violins, and then just the viola. Here we would have the cello in its full writing, cello, viola, second violin and first violin. And it's no wonder, because really the inventor of the genre of the string quartet was Haydn, and this sonata is dedicated to his teacher Haydn, and we can see this clear influence of that 4-part writing, and which in this case it's 3-part, and it really points to this beautiful texture, contrapunctal texture. So what we're seeing is a descending scale. It's C, B flat, A, B flat, then continuous A flat, G, F, E. Really, these notes are the original yellow motive. So if you think about the original yellow motive, it was an A flat, and that's exactly what we see here. Right? Of course, through a very big span. And another technique that Beethoven is teaching us here is how to do a circle of fifths. Well, many of us by now probably know what a circle of fifths is and how to build one. But this is a very peculiar one, because Beethoven is really doing it in a very extreme way, right? So we're seeing this alternation between the notes. We have E flat, and the bass going to an A flat above, D flat, going to a G, C, going to an F, and B flat, which arrives to this E. Right? And that movement is really enhanced by the orange motive. Remember, the orange motive is the one that we had here. Those octaves, right? So Beethoven is playing with octaves. And at the same time, this is syncopation. Where did we see the syncopation? Well, the syncopation was here. We had that syncopated rhythm, and now it's here. Which leads to the final part, which is D3, which basically consists of a standing on the dominant. Now, each of these sections, D1, D2, D3, have at least 2 parts. So we can see D1 has a development of A1 and a development of B2. Right. B2 on D2 on the other hand, D2 has a development of B1, and then it has this development of the orange motive, right, which was in the accompaniment. Right, and you might be wondering what is harmonically happening here. Well, harmonically we're going from the dominant to the tonic, then from the 4th degree to the 7th. So it's just a normal sequencing of circle of fifths. And the 3rd degree, which is the dominant of the 6th of F minor. And from this point onward, we can see it as F minor. So it's 1, 4, and dominant of the dominant, right, with a diminished 7th chord, really dissonant. And that leads us to the dominant, and that's the standing on the dominant in the key of F minor, which is the point that we should arrive to. So this has 2 sections, the circle of fifths and the descending sequences, right, which take a step down, a step down, and a step down. So basically Beethoven is showing us that he's in A flat, he moves up and down, and after that he says, well, I can do now a circle of fifths. Right, and that's basically his circle of fifths there in the tonic. Of course, he stays in the dominant for a prolongated time and then does the tonic. So how is this D3 built? Well, we can clearly see a pedal point, needless to say. And that pedal point is all throughout these four lines of music. So we have a constant flow of eighth notes. That's not new. That was presented in B2. Right, so let's just look at how that was in B2. In B2 we had this. Right, that was this pink motive. But there is a peculiar difference, right? Because now this has a very clear directionality. It's moving up with thirds. Moving upwards through this yellow scale. Right, Beethoven is ascending. And that ascending motion that in the right hand is really contradicted with a beautiful counterpoint. Right, which we have seen basically here in B3 in the codetta. Right, that type of tiran, tiran. At the same time, you could argue that that trill is really a variation of right, we had it there. It's now Beethoven is basically moving around most of the materials that you have in the B section and combining them in a very unique manner that becomes this new theme. And harmonically it's just dominant to tonic, and to close it we have a dominant of the dominant statement. That happens 2 times, right? So this is the second time. Some more ornamentation. We have more ornamentation, which is here. That's the ornaments, right? And after this point, Beethoven does a motivic fragmentation. Where did we see that? Well, we saw it in the first theme, A1, right? So motivic fragmentation consists of this restatement of a condensed manner. So let me kind of highlight it with this blue color. We have this, then we have it again, and now basically we're just picking this part, right, which is a much shorter statement. Right, and in a way, instead of doing a crescendo, which is the natural gesture, you would expect this to do a crescendo, he does a diminuendo, and he really goes to what we might label the anticlimax. Now, what is an anticlimax and what is the whole point of writing one in a piece? Well, if we look at this section, which was very turbulent, you had this movement. It's clearly climactic. It's pointing to the maximum tension. It's very dense. It's really building up. And it's having a lot of things going on, a lot of chord changes, sforzando, the dynamic is loud. Now, that is just the opposite of this. which is just a constant note. We can tie it to a little bit to the B1 theme now with that repeated note. But it's exactly the same note that you were seeing the sonata starting at. So in a way, Beethoven could have done this. And probably in one of his earlier drafts, these bars were missing. But I think that it would be a mistake, a terrible mistake, if those bars weren't written. They are some of the most beautiful bars ever written by Beethoven, and they are very simple in concept, but at the same time very sophisticated in sonority. So you can see it's a descending scale. It's moving downwards. It's just the opposite of what really A1 consists of. A1 was an ascending scale, now we have the descent. And it starts with this chord. Actually, probably it can be confusing to see that blue there. So I'll put it with the clear blue. So that blue chord is exactly the chord that we were seeing here. And that I was labeling as this Neapolitan chord with the sounds that can move to different places. We can see it now here. Right? It's very modern in sonority, and we're just starting with this single note. Off to the tonic, obviously with a crescendo gesture. So the materials are very transparent. You can see the yellow motif above leaping in different octaves, almost as if you were having two instruments, or a little bit like that climactic octave motion we see. So for me, I can clearly see that this is like cello, viola, second and first violin in a dialogue, right? And harmonically, well, we have this G flat. G flat is clearly the Neapolitan, but has a C in it, so it really makes it very mysterious sound. And for me, the G flat really lasts up to here, so that's all of the Neapolitan sound. Then you have the dominant, the tonic, inverted, obviously. That was also inverted, by the way, so it was seventh, and we had the third inversion. And that goes to fourth degree, a dominant seventh fourth degree, which is not very common. You would find that in the music of Greek, right? That type of more modern sonority, and it's what we're having here. Right, it moves in a contrary motion. You have the D going to E, E going to F. And that's a 4-5-1. Now, the beauty of this passage can be hardly undermined, because basically Beethoven could have omitted it, but he includes it, and it's a very smooth connection from how you would go from the dominant to the tonic. A lot of composers have done that journey. It's a very common one, and many people will do it like that, but Beethoven does it through this Neapolitan harmony. Dominant, tonic, and eventually there's the tonic. It's very sophisticated. Now, that's basically what the development is. So it's a very beautiful array of techniques. You start with the presentation of the main two themes, A1 and B1, in flipped keys. Then he just continues with B1, developing it there, adds it to a circle of fifths, and then we have a standing on the dominant, with both its loud form and tumultuous and its anticlimactic, a very subtle harmony that leads us to the recapitulation. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, like, well, the analysis is over. In most sonatas, that would be the case, because composers really don't tend, or didn't tend at that time, to do a lot of changes to the recapitulation. Beethoven doesn't do many changes here, but I'd like to highlight some of the ones that you can see here and mainly focus on the coda, which is this line that is new music, right? So let's take this with a slightly faster pace. So we're just seeing here the A1 theme. The A1 theme practically remains the same, but it has some interesting changes, because originally, I'll play the A1 that we had at the beginning. We had this. Right, so that was the theme. Now Beethoven removes the pickup and does here block chords, which really sounds very different, because originally the theme was in piano, now it's forte. Right, and all of that offbeat motion that we were having, now it's removed, and you have the chords on the downbeat, which creates new silences that weren't there. They're very dramatic pauses that really enhance the. If I were to rewrite it as the original, it would sound like this, which also has movement, but it's definitely weaker and it doesn't have that strength. Now let's look at the transition. Well, the transition, which starts here, now it doesn't have much of a purpose, because from here Beethoven could have done directly, could have continued with B1, but he decides to retain it, and in this case he does so to play for the last time with the beautiful Neapolitan sonority. Right, and here you have it. So tonic. Originally it was C minor, dominant. So now we have this tonic, and now Neapolitan. And all of that to really do a very sophisticated 2-5-1, not of the tonic, but of the subdominant. So we're in the key of B flat minor for a moment. We're doing this. And why do we want B flat minor? Because that's the chord that will allow us to do this. B flat minor, diminished chord, and dominant. Right? And needless to say, that's a very beautiful contrary motion, right? We can see how Beethoven is playing with this new material, and right, which could have been actually even in the original draft as the first transition, but it didn't make it there. He did this, which was really strong, and it was stating 3 times the main theme. Now, as we already saw, Beethoven's themes allow us to play them in major and minor, so there is no problem in doing that now in F minor. An octave leap, right? And that's where B1 ends. And we have B2. Right, remember, probably you can recall that was the dominant of the dominant. Now it becomes an Italian augmented 6. So that's a very spicy way of doing it. If I were to do it with the dominant of the dominant, it would sound like this, which sounds fine, but it loses part of its color. It's much more colorful to do this. And we arrive finally to the B3. after that, the codetta theme is presented. It works perfectly without any major change, and we arrive to this coda. So what is this? Well, it's a beautiful piece of music, obviously, and this coda is built around a circle of fifths. You have there, and then you have CF, right? A flat, E flat. We can really trace it back a lot. It's all of a circle, and then. And it's harmonized with some secondary dominant. So Beethoven does the dominant of the fourth, and then does the fourth. Here we have the dominant of the third, and now we have the third. And after that point, it's just all non-modulating. So you have this second, 5, 1, 6 degree. Well, that was actually also could be interpreted as 7. So you have it's 5, 1, and then 6, 2, because that's where the circle of fifths breaks. 2, 5, and 1 tonic. Now, what is remarkable about it is that Beethoven, in a way, is playing with the fifth that we were seeing in the codetta. So you have it in the melody. Right? So it's also and you have there the leading tone, perfect cadence. Da-dum. And finally, the beautiful element is that he is shifting the downbeat. So usually what we would find in a lot of advanced music by Beethoven, in something that Brahms really picked up about, is this type of accentuation in offbeats. It can sound at times that we're in the downbeat here, but then we're returning back to the downbeat. And well, the uses of silence is also remarkable. You have tension, suspense, resolution, drama, enhancing the drama of each chord. It's punctuating, and there it arrives to F minor. After which, well, there you have a fermata sign, and you're told to go back to the development. So that's basically how Beethoven wrote his first movement. It's clear to us that the more we look into it, it's not a piece of improvised music. It was well thought. In proof of that is actually the multiple drafts that we have of Beethoven's music. He oftentimes rewrote his music and did multiple attempts of improving and creating his pieces with a more refined texture, structure, and musical logic. So without further ado, we'll be closing this video. I'd like to thank you all for having accompanied me today, and I'll be happy to see you in the next video. Probably we'll be diversifying a little bit, and we'll be trying to do also other composers, as well as a little discussion of how I write music, to show a little bit the insight of what's really in the compositional realm. So if you are enjoying this material and you know of any other fellow musicians that are starting to compose or are interested in music analysis, please refer my channel to them. It'd be greatly appreciated. And well, see you in the next video. So hope you have a great week. Bye bye.